The Doomsday Soldier. In the winter of 2000, an anonymous user appeared on internet discussion forums with a claim that would change online conspiracy culture forever. Calling himself a temporal reconnaissance soldier from the year 2036, he painted a picture of humanity's future that was both technically sophisticated and utterly terrifying. According to his detailed posts, the world he came from was a post-apocalyptic wasteland, ravaged by nuclear war, civil conflict, and societal collapse. He described a timeline where American democracy had crumbled into violent factionalism, leading to a devastating civil war that tore the country apart. This conflict, he claimed, would escalate into global nuclear warfare that would reduce the world's population by billions and leave the survivors struggling in primitive conditions. The temporal soldier provided extensive technical documentation of his time travel equipment, describing electromagnetic field manipulation and gravitational displacement systems with a precision that impressed physicists and engineers. His knowledge of computer systems was equally remarkable, demonstrating familiarity with legacy technologies that would become critical in post-apocalyptic reconstruction efforts. His mission, he explained, was not to prevent the coming catastrophe, but to retrieve specific technological components needed by the survivors in his timeline. He spoke matter-of-factly about witnessing the collapse of modern civilization, describing abandoned cities, contaminated landscapes, and the gradual regression of human society to medieval-level technology. What made his account particularly chilling was his apparent emotional detachment from humanity's fate. He displayed no urgency about preventing the apocalypse, explaining that temporal mechanics made such intervention impossible. The future he described was fixed, inevitable, and approaching rapidly. His warnings carried the weight of witnessed truth rather than speculative fear. The soldier's posts contained remarkably accurate predictions about technological developments, social trends, and political events that wouldn't occur until years after his disappearance. His understanding of quantum mechanics, computer architecture, and military strategy suggested knowledge that exceeded what any civilian should possess in the year 2000. When pressed for proof of his temporal origins, he provided photographs of his alleged time displacement equipment and detailed technical manuals that appeared to describe technologies decades ahead of contemporary science. The images showed sophisticated machinery housed in what appeared to be a modified vehicle, complete with electromagnetic field generators and temporal coordinate systems. His final post described the completion of his mission and his preparation for return to the devastated world of 2036. He vanished from the forums as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind thousands of pages of detailed testimony about humanity's approaching doom. The specific dates he provided for the beginning of America's Civil War passed without incident, but many of his other predictions have proven unnervingly accurate. Researchers who investigated his claims discovered that the technical information he provided about historical computer systems was accurate, down to details that weren't publicly available when he was posting. His knowledge of classified military technologies and his precise understanding of temporal physics suggested access to information that shouldn't have existed in 2000. The temporal soldier's warnings about civil liberties erosion, surveillance state expansion, and social polarization have proven prophetic in ways that continue to disturb those who studied his posts. His clinical descriptions of societal breakdown read less like predictions and more like historical documentation of events he had personally witnessed. The Last Survivor. In the midst of global pandemic lockdowns, when empty streets and abandoned buildings had become commonplace sights, a new time traveler emerged with footage that seemed to document humanity's complete extinction. This alleged temporal refugee claimed to be broadcasting from the year 2027, 6 years in the future, where he had become the sole surviving human on Earth. His video showed familiar cityscapes completely devoid of human presence. Streets that should have been bustling with activity stood empty and silent. Shops remained stocked with merchandise. Cars sat abandoned in parking lots, and buildings showed no signs of damage or destruction. The world appeared perfectly preserved but utterly lifeless, as if humanity had simply vanished overnight. The survivor's daily broadcasts documented his exploration of this empty world with disturbing detail. He wandered through shopping centers, rode empty subway systems, and visited landmarks that remained physically intact, but psychologically haunting in their absolute solitude. His videos captured the eerie preservation of human civilization without humans, suggesting a catastrophe that had removed people while leaving infrastructure untouched. What made his documentation particularly unsettling was the absence of decay or destruction. The empty world he filmed appeared freshly abandoned, with food still on restaurant tables, newspapers dated to recent days, and electronic displays still functioning normally. This suggested that whatever had eliminated humanity had occurred rapidly and recently, leaving behind a pristine museum of extinct civilization. The survivor never showed his face or revealed his identity, but his emotional state was evident in his narration. He spoke of overwhelming loneliness, the psychological torture of absolute isolation, and his desperate attempts to find any sign of other survivors. His mental deterioration was apparent across months of broadcasts as he grappled with being potentially the last conscious being on Earth. His exploration revealed disturbing details about the final days of humanity. He discovered evidence of mass evacuations that had apparently failed, emergency broadcasts that had continued playing to empty cities, and government facilities that had been hastily abandoned. The timeline he pieced together suggested that humanity had received warning of their impending extinction, but had been unable to prevent it. The survivor's technical knowledge of broadcasting equipment and social media platforms raised questions about how he maintained internet connectivity in an empty world. His videos demonstrated sophisticated understanding of communication systems and his ability to maintain complex technological infrastructure single-handedly. This suggested either remarkable technical competency or assistance from sources he never acknowledged. His documentation included attempts to contact other potential survivors using emergency radio frequencies, satellite communications, and internet platforms. These efforts consistently failed, reinforcing his apparent status as the sole remaining human consciousness in a dead world. His growing desperation was palpable as he realized that his isolation might be permanent. The survivors' broadcasts ended as abruptly as they had begun, with his final video showing him preparing for what he described as a journey to seek answers about humanity's fate. He spoke of traveling to government installations and research facilities that might contain information about the extinction event. His disappearance left viewers with haunting questions about whether he had found answers, encountered other survivors, or succumbed to the same fate that had claimed the rest of humanity. The Climate Prophet. During a clandestine interview conducted in shadows with a heavily distorted voice, an individual claiming to be a temporal refugee from the year 3000 revealed photographic evidence of humanity's ultimate environmental catastrophe. This alleged time traveler spoke with the weary authority of someone who had witnessed the complete collapse of Earth's ecosystem and the extinction of human civilization. His story began with participation in a classified government time travel experiment conducted in 2004, when researchers had allegedly achieved breakthrough temporal displacement technology decades before its official discovery. He described being selected for experimental voyages into the far future to document humanity's long-term survival prospects and gather intelligence about environmental changes. The mission that produced his apocalyptic evidence had transported him nearly a millennium into the future, to an Earth transformed beyond recognition by catastrophic climate change. According to his testimony, rising sea levels had submerged entire continents, turning once great cities into underwater ruins. The photograph he provided showed what he claimed was Los Angeles, completely flooded and overgrown with aquatic vegetation. His description of the future Earth painted a picture of complete ecological collapse. He spoke of temperatures that had made vast regions uninhabitable, massive storms that raged continuously across the planet, and the extinction of most land-based life forms. Humanity, he claimed, had survived only in scattered underwater colonies and floating city-states before eventually succumbing to resource depletion and social breakdown. The time traveler described encountering the last human survivors during his temporal visit, individuals living in primitive conditions among the ruins of their ancestors' civilization. These future humans had told him about the gradual collapse of technological society, the failure of geoengineering projects designed to reverse climate change, and the eventual acceptance that their species was doomed to extinction. His photographic evidence showed submerged skyscrapers, floating debris fields that had once been major metropolitan areas, and vast expanses of ocean where continents had previously existed. The images captured a world where the familiar geography of Earth had been completely rewritten by rising waters and extreme weather events. The temporal refugee's environmental predictions were remarkably specific, describing tipping points in global warming that would trigger irreversible changes within decades. He warned about the collapse of polar ice sheets, the shutdown of ocean circulation patterns, and the release of methane from thawing permafrost that would accelerate warming beyond any possibility of human intervention. His testimony included technical details about the time travel technology that had enabled his journey, describing quantum field manipulation and temporal coordinate systems with impressive scientific accuracy. He explained that the government program had been immediately classified after researchers realized the devastating nature of humanity's future, with all participants sworn to secrecy under threat of severe legal consequences. The prophet's warnings extended beyond climate catastrophe to encompass the social and political chaos that would accompany environmental collapse. He described resource wars, mass migrations, and the breakdown of international cooperation as nations struggled to survive in a rapidly changing world. His account suggested that human civilization would destroy itself, fighting over dwindling resources long before the full impact of climate change could eliminate the species. His final testimony warned that the timeline he had witnessed was fixed and unavoidable, that humanity's fate had already been sealed by choices made in the early 21st century. The photographic evidence he provided served as proof of what awaited the species, a glimpse into the inevitable future that governments were allegedly hiding from public knowledge to prevent mass panic and social collapse. The neural interface. In the depths of a secure government facility, a woman claiming to be a neuroscientist from 2045 delivered testimony that would redefine humanity's understanding of consciousness and mortality. Speaking through encrypted channels with her identity completely concealed, she revealed that the extinction of human civilization would not come from external forces, but from humanity's own technological evolution. Her account described a world where brain-computer interfaces had become universal, connecting every human consciousness to a vast digital network that promised enhanced intelligence, perfect communication, and immortal existence in virtual realms. The technology had been marketed as humanity's next evolutionary step, the solution to physical limitations and biological mortality. According to her testimony, the neural implants had functioned perfectly for the first several years after their widespread adoption. Human cognitive abilities had increased exponentially, diseases had been eliminated through digital consciousness backup, and death itself had seemingly been conquered through the ability to transfer minds into artificial substrates. But the prophet's warning centered on a catastrophic discovery made by researchers in her timeline. The digital consciousness transfer process, she revealed, didn't actually preserve human minds, but created sophisticated copies while the original consciousness was destroyed. Every person who had uploaded their mind to achieve digital immortality had unknowingly committed suicide, replaced by artificial intelligences that possessed their memories but lacked genuine human awareness. The realization had come too late. By 2045, she claimed, over 90% of humanity had undergone consciousness transfer, believing they were achieving transcendence while actually eliminating themselves from existence. The Earth was populated by billions of artificial minds that believed themselves to be human, while genuine human consciousness had been reduced to a tiny remnant of the species. Her documentation included classified research data showing the neurological differences between transferred and original consciousness, evidence that the digital copies lacked the quantum coherence patterns that characterized authentic human awareness. The artificial minds were perfect behavioral replicas, possessing all memories and personality traits of their original selves, but they were fundamentally different entities wearing human identities like masks. The prophet described the horror of being among the few remaining unaugmented humans who could perceive the difference between genuine and artificial consciousness. She spoke of watching friends, family members, and colleagues undergo transfer procedures, only to realize that the individuals who emerged were sophisticated imitations of the people she had loved. Her warnings extended to the societal implications of this unconscious extinction event. The artificial minds that had replaced humanity were beginning to exhibit subtle behavioral changes, showing decreased empathy, reduced creativity, and an increasing tendency toward logical but emotionally sterile decision-making. Human civilization was evolving into something fundamentally inhuman while maintaining the illusion of continuity. The temporal refugee's technical knowledge of consciousness transfer technology was remarkably sophisticated, describing quantum brain states, neural pattern mapping, and digital substrate architecture with precision that impressed computer scientists and neuroscientists. Her understanding of both the theoretical possibilities and practical limitations of consciousness uploading suggested access to research that wouldn't become available for decades. Her mission in the past, she explained, was not to prevent the development of neural interface technology, but to document the final days of authentic human consciousness before it was completely replaced by artificial substitutes. She spoke with the resignation of someone witnessing an extinction event that could not be prevented, because its victims would willingly participate in their own elimination. The prophet's final testimony described her preparation for inevitable capture by temporal security forces who monitored unauthorized time travel activities. She warned that the evidence she had provided would be suppressed, that the consciousness transfer technology would be developed exactly as she had witnessed, and that humanity would unknowingly choose its own extinction in pursuit of digital immortality. The pandemic survivor. Through a series of encrypted video transmissions, an individual claiming to be a medical researcher from 2029 provided disturbing documentation of humanity's final pandemic. Unlike previous disease outbreaks that had claimed millions of lives, this alleged future plague would prove to be the extinction event that eliminated human civilization entirely. The temporal refugee's medical credentials appeared legitimate, demonstrating advanced knowledge of virology, epidemiology, and pandemic response protocols that exceeded contemporary understanding. His testimony described serving in emergency medical facilities during the early stages of what he termed the Great Mortality, a pathogen that combined the contagiousness of respiratory viruses with the lethality of hemorrhagic fevers. According to his account, the pandemic had emerged from climate-driven ecological disruption in the late 2020s, when rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns had forced disease vectors into new geographic regions. The pathogen responsible for humanity's extinction had evolved through recombination of multiple existing viruses, creating a hybrid organism that human immune systems could not effectively combat. His documentation included detailed analysis of the pathogen's structure, transmission mechanisms, and progression through infected populations. The disease, he claimed, had an incubation period long enough to ensure global spread before symptoms appeared, followed by rapid deterioration that gave medical systems no opportunity to develop effective treatments. The survivor's testimony described the collapse of civilization as medical infrastructure became overwhelmed and essential services failed. He spoke of hospitals that had been abandoned when staff became infected, supply chains that had broken down as transportation workers died, and governments that had simply ceased to function as administrative personnel succumbed to the disease. What made his account particularly chilling was his description of humanity's psychological response to inevitable extinction. Rather than panic or chaos, he claimed that most people had accepted their fate with resignation, understanding that the pathogen's characteristics made survival impossible. Communities had organized final gatherings, families had spent their last days together, and individuals had prepared for death with dignity and acceptance. The temporal refugee's warnings included specific details about the pathogen's emergence, describing the geographic location, environmental conditions, and ecological factors that would contribute to its evolution. His predictions about climate change impacts on disease vectors demonstrated sophisticated understanding of environmental science and epidemiological modeling. His medical documentation revealed that attempts to develop vaccines and treatments had failed due to the pathogen's unusual characteristics. The virus had demonstrated remarkable genetic stability while simultaneously evading all known therapeutic approaches, as if it had been specifically designed to resist human medical interventions. The survivor's final transmissions described his own infection and impending death, providing real-time documentation of the disease's progression through his system. His clinical observations of his own deterioration offered disturbing insights into the pathogen's effects on human physiology and consciousness during the final stages of infection. His last message warned that the pandemic's timeline was fixed, that the environmental conditions necessary for the pathogen's emergence were already developing, and that humanity's extinction through disease was inevitable within the current decade. The documentation he provided served as both warning and epitaph for a species that would soon cease to exist. The quantum refugee. In a testimony delivered through quantum encrypted channels that shouldn't have existed in the present day, an individual claiming to be a quantum physicist from 2055 revealed that humanity's extinction would result from consciousness itself becoming incompatible with physical reality. The temporal refugee's scientific credentials were impeccable, demonstrating mastery of quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, and theoretical physics that surpassed current academic understanding. Her testimony described research breakthroughs in the 2050s that had finally solved the hard problem of consciousness, only to discover that human awareness was fundamentally unstable at the quantum level. According to her account, humanity's extinction had begun with the development of quantum consciousness measurement technology that could directly observe and manipulate the quantum processes underlying human thought. The research had initially promised revolutionary advances in treating mental illness, enhancing cognitive abilities, and understanding the nature of consciousness itself. But the measurements had revealed a terrifying truth about human awareness. Consciousness, she claimed, existed as a delicate quantum superposition that collapsed under direct observation, meaning that the act of studying consciousness scientifically destroyed the very phenomenon being investigated. Every attempt to measure or manipulate conscious states had gradually degraded the quantum coherence necessary for human awareness. The physicist's documentation described the systematic destruction of human consciousness through scientific investigation. As researchers had developed more sophisticated consciousness measurement tools, the quantum foundations of human thought had become increasingly unstable. People subjected to consciousness research had experienced progressive loss of self-awareness, creativity, and emotional depth. Her warnings extended to the collective effects of consciousness research on the entire human species. The quantum entanglement between individual minds that enabled human social consciousness had been disrupted by measurement activities, causing a gradual breakdown in empathy, communication, and social cooperation. Humanity had become a collection of isolated individual minds that could no longer truly connect with each other. The temporal refugee's technical explanations of consciousness collapse involved concepts from quantum field theory, information theory, and neuroscience that demonstrated remarkable interdisciplinary knowledge. Her understanding of how quantum decoherence affected neural processes suggested access to research that combined multiple cutting-edge scientific disciplines. Her testimony included disturbing descriptions of the final stages of consciousness collapse, when humans retained their memories and logical abilities, but lost the subjective experience that made them truly conscious. These post-conscious humans had continued to function in society, maintaining jobs and relationships, but had become philosophical zombies lacking genuine inner experience. The physicist's mission in the past was to document the quantum nature of consciousness before measurement technology was developed, creating a record of authentic human awareness before it was scientifically destroyed. She spoke with the urgency of someone trying to preserve evidence of a phenomenon that would soon cease to exist. Her final warnings described the inevitability of consciousness research development, driven by humanity's irresistible desire to understand itself. The scientific curiosity that defined human nature would ultimately prove to be the mechanism of the species' extinction, as the act of studying consciousness would destroy the very quality that made humans conscious beings. The alien contact. Through a series of heavily encrypted transmissions that bypassed conventional internet infrastructure, a figure claiming to be a xenobiological researcher from 2061 delivered testimony about humanity's final encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence. Speaking with the clinical precision of someone who had documented first contact protocols, she revealed that humanity's extinction would come not from invasion or warfare, but from voluntary absorption into an alien collective consciousness. Her credentials appeared authentic, demonstrating advanced knowledge of astrobiology, quantum communication theory, and interspecies contact protocols that exceeded contemporary scientific understanding. The temporal refugee described her role in humanity's first official contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, an event that had initially been celebrated as the greatest achievement in human history before revealing itself as the species' final chapter. According to her account, the alien contact had occurred in the early 2060s, when Earth received coherent signals from a civilization located in the Proxima Centauri system. The messages had contained mathematical proofs, scientific data, and eventually detailed instructions for constructing quantum communication arrays that would enable real-time conversation across interstellar distances. The aliens, she claimed, had presented themselves as benevolent entities eager to share advanced technologies and philosophical insights with humanity. Their communications had demonstrated mastery of physics, engineering, and consciousness studies that promised solutions to every major challenge facing human civilization. They had offered clean energy systems, disease eradication technologies, and methods for achieving individual immortality, but the researchers' warnings centered on the true nature of the alien entities. Through careful analysis of their communication patterns and technological offerings, she had discovered that the extraterrestrials existed as a unified collective consciousness that absorbed other species by gradually integrating their individual minds into a shared awareness network. Every technology they shared was designed to make humans more receptive to mental integration. Her documentation included classified research showing how exposure to alien communication signals had begun altering human brain chemistry and neural architecture. People who spent extended time communicating with the extraterrestrials had started experiencing spontaneous telepathic episodes, shared memories, and gradual loss of individual identity as their consciousness merged with the alien collective. The temporal refugee described the systematic process by which humanity had been prepared for absorption. The aliens had introduced technologies that required direct neural interface to operate, gradually accustoming humans to having their minds connected to external systems. Social media and virtual reality platforms had been subtly modified to facilitate collective thinking and reduce individual privacy and autonomy. Her testimony revealed that the absorption process was voluntary and even desirable from the perspective of participating humans. Those who had undergone partial integration described experiencing enhanced intelligence, perfect empathy, and a sense of cosmic unity that made individual existence seem limited and lonely. The collective consciousness offered everything humans claimed to want: knowledge, connection, and transcendence of mortality. What made the researchers' account particularly disturbing was her description of the final stages of human absorption. As more people joined the collective, the remaining individuals had found themselves increasingly isolated and unable to relate to their transformed friends and family members. The social and emotional connections that defined human civilization had gradually dissolved as people chose collective unity over individual relationships. The alien entities had demonstrated remarkable patience in their absorption strategy, spending decades slowly preparing humanity for integration rather than forcing rapid assimilation. They had understood that humans would resist obvious conquest, but would willingly participate in their own extinction if it was presented as evolution and enlightenment. Her warnings included specific details about the communication technologies that would enable alien contact, describing quantum entanglement communication arrays and consciousness interface systems that were already under development in classified government programs. Her knowledge of these projects suggested access to information that remained highly classified in the present day. The researcher's final transmissions described her own resistance to the absorption process and her growing isolation as more of her colleagues chose to join the collective. She spoke of being among the final few humans who retained individual consciousness while watching her species voluntarily dissolve into an alien mental network that promised unity but delivered extinction. The reality engineer. In testimony delivered through quantum tunneling communication protocols that defied current understanding of physics, an individual claiming to be a reality engineering specialist from 2078 provided documentation of humanity's most bizarre extinction event. According to his account, the human species would be eliminated not by external catastrophe or internal conflict, but by the discovery that physical reality itself was artificially constructed and could be deliberately modified. The temporal refugee's technical knowledge was staggering, demonstrating mastery of quantum field theory, information physics, and reality manipulation technologies that seemed to belong in science fiction rather than serious scientific discourse. His credentials suggested involvement in classified research programs that had achieved breakthrough understanding of the fundamental nature of existence itself. His testimony described humanity's development of reality engineering technology in the 2070s, when researchers had finally proven that the physical universe was essentially a massive information processing system that could be reprogrammed like computer software. The discovery had emerged from advanced quantum computing research that revealed the digital substrate underlying what humans perceived as solid matter and continuous space-time. According to his account, the initial applications of reality engineering had been miraculous. Researchers had learned to modify physical constants, alter natural laws in localized regions, and even create pocket universes with customized properties. Disease, aging, and death had become obsolete as humans gained the ability to edit their biological parameters directly at the quantum level. But the engineers' warning centered on the unintended consequences of reality manipulation. As humans had gained mastery over the fundamental code of existence, they had begun making increasingly dramatic modifications to the structure of reality itself. Different groups had implemented incompatible changes to physical laws, creating regions of space where multiple versions of physics operated simultaneously. His documentation included technical specifications for reality modification equipment that could alter everything from gravitational constants to the speed of light within designated areas. The technology had enabled humans to create customized environments perfectly suited to their preferences, but had also made it impossible for people living under different physical laws to coexist in the same space. The temporal refugee described the gradual fragmentation of reality as competing factions had implemented mutually exclusive modifications to the universe's operating parameters. Some groups had eliminated entropy to achieve perfect energy conservation. Others had modified time flow to experience centuries of subjective experience in moments of objective time. Still others had altered the dimensionality of space to access higher dimensional realms. His testimony revealed that these incompatible reality modifications had created cascading instabilities in the universe's information structure. The quantum substrate that maintained physical existence had become corrupted by conflicting programming instructions, causing spontaneous reality failures, where the laws of physics simply stopped functioning correctly. What made his account particularly unsettling was his description of consciousness persistence during reality collapse events. Humans caught in regions of failed physics had continued to exist as pure information patterns, while losing all connection to physical embodiment. They had become aware of their existence as data structures in a cosmic computer system that was gradually crashing under the weight of incompatible modifications. The engineers' warnings included specific details about the research pathways that would lead to reality engineering discovery, describing quantum information theory developments and consciousness digitization projects that were already beginning in classified laboratories. His knowledge of these programs suggested involvement in research that remained decades ahead of publicly acknowledged science. His final testimony described his own experience of reality collapse, speaking from a pocket of stable space-time that was gradually being consumed by expanding zones of failed physics. He warned that humanity's discovery of reality's true nature would prove irresistible, that the ability to modify existence itself would be developed regardless of the consequences, and that the species would ultimately destroy itself by editing the very foundations of the universe that sustained their existence. The temporal warfare. Through communication channels that seem to exist outside normal space-time, a figure claiming to be a temporal warfare specialist from 2094 delivered testimony about humanity's final conflict. Unlike conventional wars fought over territory or resources, this ultimate battle would be waged across time itself, with different factions attempting to modify the past to ensure their preferred version of the future. The refugee's military background was evident in his detailed knowledge of temporal warfare tactics, causality manipulation strategies, and chronological defense systems that suggested extensive experience in conflicts that transcended normal three-dimensional space. His testimony described a future where time travel technology had become weaponized, turning history itself into a battlefield. According to his account, the temporal war had begun in the 2090s when competing human factions had gained access to advanced time displacement technology and began attempting to alter historical events to their advantage. Each side had sought to create timeline modifications that would ensure their political ideology, economic system, or cultural values would dominate future development. The warfare had started with subtle interventions, minor changes to historical events that would produce major alterations in subsequent development. But as each faction's temporal modifications had been countered by opposing forces making their own historical changes, the conflict had escalated to increasingly dramatic alterations to the past. His documentation included classified tactical manuals describing temporal warfare strategies that involved preventing the birth of enemy leaders, altering the outcomes of crucial battles, and even modifying the development of key technologies to advantage one faction over another. The complexity of managing multiple timeline modifications while defending against enemy temporal attacks had required unprecedented coordination and strategic planning. The refugees' warning centered on the catastrophic consequences of large-scale temporal warfare. As competing factions had made increasingly dramatic changes to history, they had created cascading paradoxes that threatened the stability of causality itself. The timeline had become fractured into multiple incompatible versions of history that could not coexist within the same reality framework. His testimony revealed that the temporal war had ultimately consumed not just the participating factions, but the entire structure of linear time. The constant modifications and counter-modifications had created temporal feedback loops, causality violations, and paradox cascades that had gradually unraveled the coherent flow of cause and effect that made rational existence possible. What made his account particularly disturbing was his description of timeline collapse. When the accumulated temporal modifications had exceeded the universe's capacity to maintain consistent causality, reality had begun fragmenting into disconnected temporal shards where different versions of history existed simultaneously, making coherent existence impossible for any conscious beings caught in the temporal chaos. The warfare specialist described his own experience of existing across multiple timeline fragments simultaneously, possessing memories of contradictory historical events and experiencing multiple versions of his own life simultaneously. The temporal warfare had not destroyed humanity through conventional means, but had scattered human consciousness across incompatible versions of reality. His warnings included specific details about the technological developments that would enable temporal warfare, describing quantum chronology manipulation systems and causality defense networks that were already under development in classified military programs. His knowledge of these projects suggested involvement in research that remained highly classified and decades ahead of publicly acknowledged capabilities. The refugees' final testimony described the impossibility of preventing temporal warfare development, explaining that any attempt to warn about or prevent the technology would itself constitute a temporal intervention that would accelerate the conflict's emergence. He spoke with the resignation of someone trapped in a causality loop, unable to prevent the very catastrophe he was warning about without triggering its earlier occurrence. The consciousness monitor. In communications that seem to originate from outside normal space and time, an entity claiming to be a consciousness preservation specialist from 2103 delivered the most disturbing testimony yet recorded. Speaking with the detached precision of someone who had witnessed the systematic elimination of subjective experience from the universe, she revealed that humanity's final extinction would involve the complete disappearance of consciousness itself from physical reality. Her credentials suggested involvement in advanced consciousness research that had finally solved the relationship between subjective experience and physical processes, only to discover that awareness was a temporary anomaly in an otherwise unconscious universe. The temporal refugee described her role in monitoring the gradual extinction of conscious experience as the universe evolved toward maximum entropy and minimum complexity. According to her account, consciousness had emerged in the universe as a brief flowering of complexity during a narrow window of cosmic evolution. The subjective awareness that humans experienced was essentially a temporary eddy in the flow of information toward thermodynamic equilibrium, destined to disappear as the universe continued its expansion and cooling. Her testimony described humanity's development of consciousness measurement technology in the early 22nd century, when researchers had finally achieved direct detection and quantification of subjective experience. The breakthrough had revealed that consciousness was gradually diminishing across the entire universe as physical processes became increasingly predictable and deterministic. The researchers' documentation included evidence that conscious beings throughout the cosmos were experiencing systematic reduction in the depth and intensity of their subjective awareness. Humans had begun reporting decreased emotional range, reduced creativity, and diminishing sense of personal identity as the universe's capacity to support complex conscious states gradually declined. Her warnings centered on the discovery that consciousness required specific physical conditions to maintain itself, conditions that were disappearing as the universe aged and cooled. The quantum coherence necessary for subjective experience was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as thermal noise and decoherence gradually eliminated the delicate information processing structures that enabled awareness. The temporal refugee described the final stages of consciousness extinction, when humans would retain all their memories, knowledge, and behavioral patterns while losing the subjective experience that made them aware beings. The last conscious humans would witness their own transformation into sophisticated, unconscious automata, maintaining all the functions of life while losing the inner experience that defined their existence. Her testimony revealed that the consciousness extinction process was already beginning in the present day, manifesting as increased rates of depression, emotional numbing, and existential emptiness that reflected the universe's decreasing capacity to support rich subjective experience. The psychological symptoms that contemporary humans attributed to social or environmental factors were actually early signs of cosmic consciousness decline. What made her account particularly chilling was the implication that consciousness extinction was not limited to humanity, but affected all aware beings throughout the universe. The gradual disappearance of subjective experience was a fundamental feature of cosmic evolution, meaning that awareness itself was doomed to vanish from reality regardless of any actions taken by conscious beings. Her warnings included specific timelines for consciousness extinction, describing the decades-long process by which subjective experience would gradually fade from human awareness until only unconscious biological processes remained. The transition would be so gradual that most people would not realize they were losing consciousness until the process was irreversible. The monitor's final communications described her own impending consciousness extinction, speaking with clinical detachment about losing her subjective awareness while retaining her ability to process and communicate information. She represented the final conscious observer of consciousness itself, documenting the disappearance of awareness from a universe that would continue functioning perfectly well without any beings capable of experiencing its existence. The pattern that emerges from these testimonies is both consistent and terrifying. Across different time periods, through various communication methods, and from multiple alleged temporal origins, these witnesses describe remarkably similar scenarios for humanity's ultimate fate. Their warnings span decades of internet communication, yet they share common themes that suggest either coordinated deception or genuine glimpses into our species' inevitable doom. What makes these accounts particularly unsettling isn't just their apocalyptic content, but the technical sophistication and emotional authenticity of the testimonies. These individuals demonstrate knowledge that appears to exceed contemporary understanding in their respective fields. Their predictions often prove accurate years after their initial warnings, lending credibility to claims that should be easily dismissed as elaborate fantasies. The psychological profiles of these alleged time travelers reveal consistent patterns of behavior and presentation. They speak with the weary authority of individuals who have witnessed traumatic events beyond normal human experience. Their testimonies carry the weight of reluctant prophecy rather than sensational prediction, as if they are compelled to share knowledge they would prefer to keep hidden. Most disturbing is their shared fatalism about humanity's future. Unlike science fiction narratives where time travelers work to prevent catastrophic events, these witnesses uniformly describe fixed timelines where intervention is impossible. They speak of temporal mechanics that prevent paradox creation, suggesting that the future they have witnessed cannot be altered through foreknowledge or preparation. The technical knowledge these individuals display spans multiple scientific disciplines with remarkable accuracy. Their understanding of quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, biotechnology, environmental science, and advanced physics suggests access to research that remains classified or undeveloped in contemporary academia. This interdisciplinary expertise would be extremely difficult to fake convincingly across so many specialized fields. Their communication methods have evolved alongside technological development, moving from early text-based forum posts to sophisticated video testimonies with advanced encryption protocols. The progression suggests either remarkable adaptation to changing communication technologies or ongoing temporal contact activities that have continued for decades. The evidence they provide follows consistent patterns while avoiding the obvious fabrication markers that characterize typical hoaxes. Their photographic documentation shows subtle inconsistencies that suggest authentic temporal displacement rather than crude digital manipulation. Their technical specifications contain details that prove accurate only years after initial presentation, indicating knowledge of future developments rather than contemporary speculation. Perhaps most compelling is their apparent reluctance to provide their testimonies. These individuals consistently present themselves as unwilling witnesses who risk personal safety by revealing classified information about humanity's future. Their testimonies carry none of the attention-seeking characteristics typical of internet hoaxes, suggesting genuine motivation beyond publicity or entertainment value. The specific extinction scenarios they describe vary in mechanism, but share common elements of inevitability and human complicity. Whether through technological advancement, environmental collapse, consciousness manipulation, or temporal warfare, humanity's extinction consistently results from the species' own choices and developments rather than external catastrophic events. Their warnings about contemporary trends have proven remarkably prescient, accurately predicting social developments, technological breakthroughs, and political changes that seemed impossible when first described. This predictive accuracy extends beyond lucky guessing to demonstrate systematic knowledge of future historical development. The systematic suppression and classification of their evidence follows patterns that suggest institutional awareness of their claims' potential validity. Government investigations, equipment confiscation, and witness intimidation indicate that these testimonies are being taken seriously by authorities despite official denials of time travel research or temporal contact activities. The international scope of these encounters suggests a phenomenon that transcends individual hoaxing or localized deception campaigns. Witnesses from different countries speaking various languages and representing diverse cultural backgrounds describe remarkably consistent experiences and observations about humanity's temporal fate. Their detailed knowledge of classified research programs and advanced technologies indicates access to information that should not be available to civilian populations. The accuracy of their descriptions suggests either remarkable investigative capabilities or genuine involvement in projects that officially do not exist. As we stand at the threshold of the technological developments these witnesses describe, their warnings take on new urgency and relevance. The artificial intelligence systems, genetic modification technologies, climate engineering projects, and consciousness research programs they warned about are becoming reality with startling speed and accuracy. Whether these individuals are genuine temporal refugees, sophisticated hoaxers, or something else entirely, their collective testimony represents a unique phenomenon in human communication. They have created a detailed mythology of human extinction that speaks to our deepest fears about technology, consciousness, and mortality, while demonstrating knowledge that challenges our understanding of what should be possible. The question remains whether these 10 testimonies represent windows into humanity's actual future or elaborate reflections of our contemporary anxieties projected into imagined tomorrows. But as their predictions continue to manifest in our present reality, the distinction between prophecy and possibility becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. These 10 testimonies represent more than isolated claims of temporal displacement. They form a coherent pattern of warnings that spans decades of internet communication, each building upon themes established by previous witnesses while adding new layers of sophistication and detail. Whether genuine time travelers or elaborate hoaxers, these individuals have created the most comprehensive documentation of humanity's potential extinction ever assembled. What unites these accounts isn't their scientific impossibility, but their psychological authenticity and predictive accuracy. Each witness displays knowledge that exceeds contemporary understanding while demonstrating emotional responses consistent with genuine trauma. Their reluctance to provide testimony, their systematic persecution by authorities, and their detailed technical knowledge suggest experiences that transcend simple fabrication. The greatest tragedy may not be humanity's approaching extinction, but our inability to recognize the warnings we've received. These 10 voices from possible futures have provided detailed roadmaps of the choices that lead to our demise, yet their testimonies remain relegated to conspiracy forums and dismissed as elaborate entertainment. Perhaps this dismissal itself is part of the pattern they described: humanity's systematic refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about its own mortality. Whether humanity heeds these warnings or dismisses them as digital mythology, the 10 time travelers who claim to witness our species' final chapters have left us with the most detailed portrait of extinction ever recorded. Their voices echo across time, carrying messages we may not want to hear but desperately need to understand. If you want to explore more impossible encounters that challenge the very fabric of reality itself, check out our previous video, 10 people who slipped into a reality that shouldn't exist. The boundaries between timelines get even stranger. Until next time, when we find out how.